if you can't keep up with your electric bill, can the provider force you from account to pay as you go?
Great question. In fact, I'm talking a little more about this later in the show, Andrew, and I was going to answer that exact question, but I will give you the answer now. They can't force you as such, but they can force you. And let me explain what I mean by that. They have an obligation to try to take steps to avoid having to put you in a position where you get your electricity or gas cut off. And one of those steps would normally be to install a prepay meter. So that means you can't incur more and more debt. If you refuse to give them access to install the prepay meter, then they'll just say, OK then, and they'll move to the next step, which is getting a warrant of entry to your property from a court and then cutting off your electricity. There are times when they can't cut off electricity. I'll talk about that a little later in the show. But basically, the prepay meter is an intermediate stage between you not being able to pay your bills and them cutting you off. It's actually, although a lot of people might not agree with me, it's seen as a good thing rather than a bad thing.
If there is a vulnerable person in that property, can they still do that?
What do you mean by vulnerable? Can you give me a little more detail?
A 94-year-old woman who cannot afford the higher amount of heat, the higher amount of costs, and without it, obviously, she's going to freeze.
Yeah. So they cannot cut off someone's electricity if they're over retirement age in the winter months. Unfortunately, they're allowed to cut off electricity if there are significant unpaid bills in the summer months, irrespective of the age of the person. Now, sometimes a judge might refuse a warrant of entry. Might. But that's quite unusual. You've got to be very lucky with the judge and the day. But most judges will say the money's owing, it's not disputed, it hasn't been paid. The electricity company, which is ultimately a commercial organisation, isn't obliged to continue supplying free energy to people who don't pay the bills. Now, a lot of people will think that's an incredibly cruel position, but that's broadly what the law says, I'm afraid, Andrew.